and some 30 plus internet connections working well this morning. I will, great. I see mostly everybody's muted themselves. That's super. And a couple of people have found that it's a beautiful day outside, so that's great too. We're fortunate to be involved in a community that's so large. Even though I've been a member of RUMC for 20 years, I find there are guys I have never met before in my life, and I think they're new, which is naive on my part. And then I find out they've been there longer than me. So I was a little surprised when about 5 or 6 weeks ago now, Jimmy got on, and he was the one doing the announcement to say which ministers were staying, which ministers were going, where were they going. I was like, how can there be somebody at the church in that kind of position of intrigue, I'll call it intrigue, who I had never met before. And so I reached out to Jimmy and gotten to know him a little bit over the last 2 or 3 months as we've been talking about what is it like to speak at men's breakfast. And I guess I'll continue to look up to him because he's about a foot taller than me. And I realized now he is this is his bio. So I got it off his law firm's page. And anytime you go to a lawyer's website and get their legal information, I think they send you a bill. I haven't gotten my bill yet, so I'm hoping I went to the public-facing site. But you do product liability law, and he has been I can't wait to find out what this means, a Georgia super lawyer many times. And I think for this group, what many of them would find interesting is that you were general counsel for the Georgia State Golf Association. That's the sport where you chase the little white ball, right? Sorry, poor attempt at humor this morning. And he has also been serving on the Pastor Parish Relations Committee. Everybody normally says that is the PPRC. So I said, Jimmy, please come and tell us about your story. I got a little bit to know him over the phone. I don't think we've ever actually met in person, but he sat next to my wife at some kind of church meal event within the last 2 years. And she said he seemed like a fine, upstanding man. So with that recommendation, Jimmy, thank you so much for being with us here this morning.
Well, thanks, Eric. And at least I've got your wife fooled. So, guys, let's just start with a word of prayer if we could. God, we thank you for this beautiful day. We thank you for your son, Jesus. We thank you for the opportunity we have, for the technology where we can gather. Lord, we pray that you would just bless this time of fellowship this morning. In your name we pray, amen. I've got.
Everyone's muted now.
Yep, I'll try and find that. There we go.
Thank you so much.
All right. Okay. Eric had asked me to talk about this concept of Methodist itinerancy, and also just a little bit about my journey at RUMC. I have not participated in the men's breakfast before. I have been in a Bible study that we meet in weekly in the morning for 20-something years. I traveled a fairly good bit before the COVID. And so I was unaware until I looked at last month's and realized that there are people on this that attend this that know more about the Methodist Church than I'll know, and they've forgotten more than I'll ever know. And people who've been at the church a lot longer than I have. So I don't know that I have a whole lot to say to anybody that will be worth getting up in the morning for, but I'll try to add a couple things. I went to college I grew up Presbyterian, and I went to college at Mercer down in Macon. And I would walk across the street to the little Methodist church there. Sometimes we'd go to the Methodist church downtown. In law school, I was on the national and state trial practice team. And we try cases against other schools in competition. And the professor approached me. I was interviewing my third year in Atlanta and Savannah and places like that. I just knew I wanted to get out of Macon. That was my only goal, and get in the courtroom. And so she approached me and said, there's this famous lawyer in a place called Metter, Georgia, that wants somebody who can go in the courtroom the first day. And and he wants me to send you down to interview. And I'd like you to go down and talk to him. And in those days, I was going to Atlanta or Savannah. You would go to a law firm, you would interview with 3 people for 5 or 10 minutes. If they liked you, you got a second interview a week or so later, and you'd interview maybe 3 or 4 more people, and then you'd come back for the 3rd interview, and maybe they'd take you to lunch and make you an offer. So I go to see this guy in Metter, Georgia, and it was a 4-hour interview. Never experienced anything like it. And at the end, he says, okay. He said, I want to hire you. I want you to come work for me. He said, I'll put you in the courtroom the first day. I'll teach you how to fly. He had a small plane. He said, I'll pay you country club dues. There was a little 9-hole course there. He said, I won't pay what the Atlanta salary is paying, but tell me the top salary in Savannah and I'll match it. I said, where do I sign? So I went to Metter, Georgia. And, I grew up in Atlanta and lived in Atlanta all my life. And so it was a very unique thing to be in the country. I love to hunt and fish and play golf and softball, basketball, stuff like that. So it was a great place for a single guy until it got dark and the sidewalks rolled up. And, you would think that a small town is friendly, and I guess it is, but everybody my age was married, and all the women either were married or they left town and never came back. So I don't know whether the best decision was going there or leaving there, but I got a lot of experience. But I rented a house across the street from the jail, and it was like Andy Griffith. There was the sheriff came up to me like the first week I was there and said, you need your grass cut and your car washed, so you give me $5 a week and I'll take care of it. I didn't know what he meant, and I talked to my boss, and he said, oh, yeah, you need to do it. He said the inmates, they need that money. So sure enough, I give the sheriff $5 a week, and sometimes I'd come home, and one of the inmates is out cutting my grass, and another guy's out washing my car, and I thought it was pretty cool. But so there was a Methodist church 2 blocks away. I could walk to it. So I started to go there, and the minister was a great guy, a lot of fun. We fished together, really neat guy. He had cancer and beat it. And I go to church one morning and he's not there. And this person who is either a bishop or a district superintendent, I can't remember now which one it was, is saying that he's been moved and he's not coming back. And I'm thinking to myself, how could that happen? I thought he was the minister of this church. So that was my first experience with how the Methodist system worked. So I moved back to Atlanta after a year and a half, met my wife, we got engaged, and we started visiting churches, and we went to Roswell, 1985. And so Malone's a minister, and we, it's up in the what's now chapel, and we walk outside. Some of you may have heard the story. And so, in those days you shake the preacher's hand. And so, we said we're visiting for the first time. And I asked if he had a basketball team. And he said, absolutely we do. He said, I don't know when they meet, but you can call the church. But absolutely, we have a basketball team. So he was a good preacher, and we had a good time, a nice church. So we went back the next week. And he starts a sermon, and he's talking about service or something. And he says, and oh, by the way, last week there was a guy about 6'10" that was visiting for the first time. And he asked me if we had a basketball team. He said, I told him we did. He said, I had no idea if we did or didn't, but I knew we were going to, so I wasn't lying when I said that we did. And so he said, in case you're out there, we do have a basketball team. It already exists. We don't have to form one. And it meets on Monday night, 6:30. So I show up Monday night. I change my clothes. The fellowship hall down, there's got carpet, and the basketball goes are down, no chairs or anything. 3 or 4 basketballs laying in the middle of the floor, and nobody's there. So I'm looking around. I shoot a little while, and nobody's there. It actually met at 7. So I get ready to leave, and I start to walk out the door, and this guy walks in, and I was a Kappa Sig at Mercer. And many of you know him, this guy named Dan Day. So he walks in, he's got Kappa Sig sweats on. He introduces himself. We start talking, and then some other guys start coming in. We have a lot of fun playing basketball. Dan and Catherine had just recently been married. They invited us to the Discovery Sunday School class, which met across the street, what used to be an elementary school. Now it's the alternative school. And we met in the kindergarten room. So the chairs were about, 6 inches off the ground. For a long-legged guy like me, it was kind of crazy. But so we got active in discovery and started getting active in the church at that point in time. We joined in 1987. And then I got on various committees and finance and stewardship and things. And then Dan and I chaired stewardship together, and I think it was 1990. And then I started doing different things, board of stewards, and then I was vice chair of the board of stewards. And I don't know if any of you on the call were here at the time or remember the incident, but it's a miracle and it shows forgiveness. So I was the vice chair of board of stewards, and I had to conduct the meeting because the chairman was not there. And we had moved into the new building. We were in the choir room, 100 and something people, and it's supposed to start about 7. And everybody's just talking, blah, 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 lots of noise in the room. And I'm trying to get everybody's attention so we can start. And there's this little wooden block on the table. And I can't find the gavel, but I had a college ring. So I turned it over and I just bam, 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 3 times pretty hard. And I had no idea it was a hearing impaired device. And so there were 3 of the elderly women in the church. They must have been in the 80s. They were like dolphins. They came straight up out of their chairs in the air, twisted and turned, started screaming. I mean, I didn't know, I thought I'd been shot. I didn't know what was going on. I'm looking around, and Beverly Godown was Malone's assistant at the time, and she grabbed my hand and she said, "That's the hearing impaired device." So I apologized, and I apologized to the ladies, and I guess they can hear now. But I didn't get run out of the church, so I was still there. Got on board of trustees, and then I've taught 2nd grade up to 6th grade kids Sunday school, taught some adult Sunday school. I really enjoy doing that. I've been on a lot of committees and different small things for different projects in the church over the years since we started going in 1985 and so forth. Then a couple of times when Malone was there, I was on what was at the time the past parish relations, and it used to be 2 committees. You had pastor parish relations and then lay personnel. And I was on pastor parish relations. There was a guy named Jerry Dawes. Some of you may remember him. He was a friend. He was in the Sunday school class, and he was on. And so when I was asked to be on it, he told me, he said, "I'll tell you before you go to your first meeting, being on PPR is like watching sausage being made." He said, ministers are human like everybody else, and you're going to hear a lot of confidential stuff, but you're also going to hear, some stuff that's not pleasant. And so over the course of a number of years, fortunately at Roswell, there have been some blips, but it's been a really neat experience to work alongside the ministers and to help build them up and edify them and help in some way. So I was on it a couple of different 3-year periods during Malone's time, and then in the transition between Malone and Mike coming. And Mike was different than Malone. Malone believed that if you were good on a committee, then you were there for life. He wanted to make sure that he knew who was there and had some experience. Mike felt like there was some continuity was important, but he also thought it was very important to get new people involved and to keep people from being burned out. So I rotated off, and then he asked me to come back on, and then to chair pastor parish relations. And then it was one of those years he was having a difficult time, and I chaired it a second time, 2 years in a row for Mike. And a little golf story on the side is as I finished and rotated off, he wanted to say thank you, and he gave me a putter. And he also said, since this is church related, I have to give you a Bible. And so he gave me Dave Pelt's putting Bible. And if any of you know Dave Peltz or read him, he is literally a rocket scientist. And so it's bigger than any Bible. I mean, that thing is like a Webster encyclopedia. I mean, it is huge. And I studied that book and I read that book, and I was a good putter, I thought in my mind, until I read that. And it messed me up probably for 15 years. I mean, it was, maybe it's good for some people, but I became so mechanical trying to do all this stuff that I just, it didn't really work well for me. But I still have it. I go back to it from time to time. But it was a good time with Mike, and I enjoyed the time with him. Let me clear this up. But this thing popped off here just a minute. Am I still on here, I guess?
Yep, we can see you and hear you just fine.
Okay, good. Well, I don't understand what this is good. We're good. During the course of being on there 2 years, 2 different times with Malone, 5 years during Mike's tenure, and then also the transition Mike to Tom, I've seen a lot of ministers come and go, and I've read a lot about this idea of itinerancy. And so kind of talk to you a little bit about that. John Wesley obviously founded the Methodist Church. He preached over 40,000 sermons, and he preached them in fields, in barns, all over, in town, cities. I mean, he traveled extensively. So that's how Methodism got started. He was asked one time, and he said about his parish, and he said, "The world is my parish." And so that was his concept of the Methodist minister. And then comes along, I got a quote for you. In 1756, he wrote this letter. "We have found by long and consistent experience that a frequent exchange of preachers is best. This preacher has one talent, that another. No one whom I ever yet knew has all the talents for beginning, continuing, and perfecting the work of grace in an entire congregation." And so that was his view of it. He believed a preacher was who moved from place to place was going to be more effective than somebody who was comfortable, who was just set, and who, the congregation may, get tired of hearing the same old thing or the same old person. So he felt like preachers ought to be moved. And then along comes Francis Asbury, who was one of his assistants. Many of you may know a lot more about him, certainly than I do, but at 22, he was a traveling preacher and assistant to Wesley. And in 1771, he agreed to come to the New World. So he comes over, and he gets to what is now the United States. He preaches 25 different places in the first year. And then the Revolutionary War kind of gets going, and I don't want to get into the politics of all that stuff, but he tries to maintain a neutral stance. And then in 1784, he's still here, and he and Thomas Coke are appointed as co-superintendents, or bishops, and I'll talk about bishops in a minute. So he established a number of societies of the Methodist Church. I think 700 preachers he ordained in his time. And until Asbury died, he would travel an average of 6,000 miles every year, preaching, teaching, conferences, so forth. So you've got that concept of Wesley traveling everywhere. You got the concept of Asbury's experience as one of the first bishops in the United States. He would ordain these preachers, and he would give them an area, and there would be maybe half a state or territory, and they would stay there 3 or 4 months, and then he would move them to another area and move somebody new into that area. So that entire itinerant preacher, if you will, the circuit rider, was how Methodism developed in the United States. They rode that circuit. Coke and Asbury were the first quote unquote bishops. And I didn't realize this till I started reading about it, but bishop comes from the New Testament Greek episkopos, which means the one who can see the whole picture. I thought that was interesting, and it helps understand part of this itinerancy question. So that's the background. The question, if you sit there and you think about it from a standpoint of a congregation, well, we have a new minister. or we want this. We think, what is best for us? The minister themselves may say, hey, what is best for me and my family? I want to go where, I think it's best. What's best for me? And from the beginning, that question is specifically not the question to ask. It's not what is best for me. From a Methodist standpoint, when the denomination believes what is best for the Methodist community, the Methodist connection overall. And so that's what drives these appointments and these decisions. And then the Methodist minister, we have two kinds. We have deacons and elders. And if you're an elder, you take a unique vow. You take a vow to go where sent. And that's pretty unique of any denomination. The education requirements between elders and deacons are the same. Some deacons, I understand, don't have to have as many business organization type classes that elders do, but the educational requirements from a biblical perspective and a seminary perspective are the same. But there are two different types of ordination. When an elder is ordained, they're ordained to a ministry of word, sacrament, order, and service. And they take the vow to go where sent. A deacon is ordained to a ministry of word, service, compassion, and justice. They're called to a ministry that brings the church into the world and the world into the church, but they don't take a vow to go where sent, and they can also cross lines between the conference where they hold their membership. And that's why, we want to go out and find, for example, a deacon as a youth minister, or a deacon as a music minister, or some unique area, education. We can go to Texas, or we can go anywhere we want to go, and we can hire a deacon. They're an ordained clergy person. They can come outside the conference that they're a member of, and we can do that with inside the church, and the bishop doesn't really have a say-so in it, nor does the district superintendent. From an elder's perspective, though, that's different. An elder goes where served, and so the bishop makes that appointment. They have the same functions. They teach, they preach, pastoral care, weddings, funeral, that kind of stuff, but a deacon can never be a senior minister of a church. And so the difference is as you're going through is, do you want to be moved and take the commitment and the place to go where sent, or do you want to have a little more control? Technically, a deacon is not supposed to administer the sacraments unless they're doing it under the direction of an elder or senior minister. But and so that's typically what's done in some churches. The appointment process, you're appointed, that's the action of the bishop in determining that someone's going to go someplace. I don't know how many of you know it, but the appointments are always only for 1 year. So, Malone was here a lot of years, and every single year he had to be reappointed. And same thing with Tom now and with Mike. I mean, every elder has to be reappointed every year, or appointed every year. And, it's reappointed to the local church that they're in, or appointed to a new church. The bishop, the process is not an easy one. It's a process that takes almost a year, probably. The bishop takes into consideration the needs as expressed by the local congregation through the PPR, or Staff Parish Relations Committee. The bishop gets a council of district superintendents with them, and they make these decisions on whether to reappoint a particular elder minister to a local congregation that they're in, or to move them to a different one. In our church, but I'll tell you, they also, Roswell is unique, as you all know. We have incredible programs. We have a huge lay staff. We have a huge clergy staff. We have, a lot of people. We have a huge campus. It'd be very difficult for a 4-year person who's only been an associate at a 40-person church, in the country to come over and be the CEO of this kind of an organization. So the bishop understands that. And when Mike was being appointed to district superintendent position, and we knew we were going to have a transition, the bishop asked PPR, okay, what is it that you want in a minister? What are you looking for? And what do you think you need? So as a committee, we talked about it, thought about it, prayed about it, and provided information. But the bishop made it clear to us that we don't get to choose. We can't go out and hire somebody. We can't go visit different churches and listen to preachers and say, we want that one. And so the bishop makes those appointments the way the bishop feels is the best for Methodism and for the Methodist Church and the Methodist connection overall, taking into consideration not only the minister that's going to be moved there, but also the congregation itself. So that's how that's done. We have Tom, Jeff, and Joe as ordained elders. Marion is an ordained elder as well. She, though, is in the Kentucky Conference. She's here kind of with permission of that bishop and our bishop, but she's technically part-time. Melissa she was a deacon. She set for ordination in January and is now an elder. And then you have Nancy and Michael Cromwell, who are deacons. Now there's a debate. I'll tell you real quick, there's a debate as to whether that's a proper system in today's day and age. I don't have a comment necessarily, but I'll tell you some of the arguments for the yeses and the nos. On the yes side, it allows a minister to preach the word without fear or concern because they are responsible to the DS and the bishop. And even though they're technically responsible to the local church and run the local church, the church can't hire them or fire them. So they can just teach the way they want to teach and preach the way they want to preach. I think very importantly, maybe not so hopefully in today's day and age, but probably 15, 20 years ago, perhaps even, if there's sexism, if there's racism, if there's any other ism that's prevalent in a particular congregation, the fact that the bishop makes the appointment of the minister, that ensures that sentiment of that local congregation has no influence on who's going to be their leader and no influence on what that person's going to preach to them because it comes from the bishop. It helps if you don't know whether or not your senior minister is going to be there next year or not. And that's technically true across the board. It helps encourage the local church to get lay leaders involved and to increase the lay ministry and develop the lay ministry. It also helps local congregation hopefully put their trust in God and not on any particular individual. Because all of you know there's been dynamic, charismatic preachers who've led congregations down the wrong path. So it also allows the bishop who, going back to that phrase or that meaning of what a bishop is he who sees the entire picture. It allows somebody who knows what's going on over here and knows what's going on over here and the Methodist commitment and the congregations and the community collectively, it allows that person, when the individual churches don't know what's going on next door, to say, well, in this particular area, we need somebody with these gifts and graces, and the Christianity can flourish, the church can flourish over here. I'm going to move this person here. And I think Joe's an example of that. Joe is, as many of you know, is an excellent teacher and an excellent preacher, and he's got unique gifts and graces. And the church there he's going to, and it's technically Marietta, but it's right at 92 towards Woodstock. It's a fertile field and area up there, and I think that it's going to be a great place, and Joe's going to do incredibly well there. So the contrary view, though, is that this is an antiquated system. All these ministers who rode the circuit back in the horse and buggy days were single men. It doesn't work if you're married. It doesn't work if you have a family. It doesn't work if your spouse works. It doesn't work if you're a female and your husband works, that you're going to, you make a commitment, and you may be jerked up and moved, a year, 2, 3 years down the road, 5 years down the road, you may be going to Augusta from Atlanta, or from, someplace else. You can just be moved around. So it's antiquated. In today's day and age, cars, you can, I don't know about many of you probably drive, and I pass a number of churches to get to Roswell every single Sunday morning that I go. There are a lot more churches, and there are Methodist churches that are closer to my house than Roswell. And so I could go to a lot of different churches, and there's an ease of transportation with our vehicles. And in that information age, and in this age of the automobile, the thought process is that when a new person comes on in a congregation, it usually takes 3 to 5 years for the entire congregation to get to know that minister, to trust that minister, to get behind that minister, and then for the change that congregation may need to have implemented either in the community or in the congregation to take place. And so, if they're going to be moved every couple of years, or before everybody gets to know it, the contrary view is that this is an antiquated system, because in today's day and age, you need 3 to 5 years to get to know a minister and to help. And also there's a thought process that, if some talented person is coming into the ministry, and really has skills and graces to be a senior minister, and yet they don't want to take the vow to go where sent. They're called to ministry, but they want to have more say with their family or with their spouse and where they go, that they may not be an elder and instead just be a deacon. So that's another reason why there's a contrary view. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't make the rules. And so, I don't, I told Mike, and I also told Tom, when I agreed to serve on the PPR, that I'll do it for people. I'll do it. I'm happy, and I enjoy serving, and I want to serve, and I look at it as my responsibility to serve the people of Roswell and the minister of Roswell, but not the institution or the entity, whether it's Methodist Church overall. So the way I look at it is our ministry is to each other, both as a family here and in the connection. And so that's where we are. So we've got got some people on the phone I know that are on the call that are on the SPRC. It was combined, as I mentioned, it was lay personnel, and then it was past parish relations. And then probably just before Mike left, the idea was to combine the two. Instead of 2 different committees, we have one. So it was co-chaired by Alan Kennedy and Linda Layton. Linda was the chair of the lay personnel, and Alan was the chair of PPR. And so it's now the SPRC, and our committee is responsible for not only the lay staff, paid lay staff, but also the clergy. We're a committee that's established by the discipline, and the discipline has certain requirements. But the bottom line of what we're supposed to do is we provide advice to the ministers, we encourage the ministers, we support the ministers primarily, and then also assist in the kind of day-to-day, I guess you would call it. In our church, we don't have to do it. We've got a CEO and we've got a church business administrator, but we assist from the standpoint from a lay personnel or staff, lay staff standpoint, and some personnel decisions and things like that. But so that's it. So about 7 years ago, my daughter, my youngest child, my other 2 had gone off, and my youngest child was about to go to college, and I was asked to be general counsel of the Georgia State Golf Association. And I actually knew, apparently my name had come up like 2 or 3 different sources or ways. and I knew the incoming president, and I knew the former general counsel. I'd gone to law school with him, and I knew somebody who had been the president previously, had litigated with people in their firm. And so I talked to the general counsel, and he said, a couple hours a month, you'll look at some finances, records. I mean, it's not a big deal. Maybe you'll look at a television contract or something, but, it's not a big deal. It's fine. And, you can go, tell somebody that you're general counsel and you can play golf. I go to Callaway and they don't charge me when I play down there or something like that. So I said, well, maybe it's not a bad deal. I tell you, it's been rewarding, but it's been a lot of work. It's a volunteer position, and so this is my 6th or 7th year doing it, and I'm keep trying to get out. But as many of you may know who are golfers or who follow the GSGA, they redid Bobby Jones down there, and they're building Golf House. And so the GSGA's offices are going to be there. And the Georgia State Golf Hall of Fame is going to be there. And I worked on some documents and some contracts with the state about the Hall of Fame and about the GSGA's responsibility. Technically, it's a responsibility of the state agency, but the GSGA is responsible for it for about 50 years now. And so if you haven't been down to Bobby Jones, I mean, the building's not complete. It should be complete before the year's over, but the Hall of Fame is going to have a lot of virtual stuff, and so you'll be able to go around and learn a lot about golf in Georgia and Bobby Jones and a lot of other people. So it's kind of a neat thing, and so that's about it. You make a mistake, Eric, when you give a lawyer a microphone. I charge by the minute. And by the way, you have to get a bill if you went to the webpage. So.
Well, Jimmy, you had me when you talked about your first job, and they were going to get you a pilot's license. So you had me tuned for the entire time. The one thing I hate about Zoom is when we're all muted, you don't get to hear the chuckles, and so it's delightful to get to know somebody under these circumstances. This is a role in a church that affects a lot of what we hear and get said for all the years those ministers are pastors at our church. Have you found in serving, I didn't realize how long you had been involved in that process. You're sort of the elder statesman of that process. How has that impacted your faith? I mean, the implications of this are significant both in their families and in the entire church.
It's probably an interesting question. I think, I don't know whether it was because of what Jerry Dawes told me initially or whether it's just experiential. When I was a younger man, I would attend church and the minister is on this pedestal. And, they have a black robe, just like as a lawyer, you look up and you see a judge has got this black robe, and there's a certain deference there, and you have certain preconceived notions about that person. Well, as a lawyer, I got to be careful. I understand this is being recorded. As a lawyer, you see a lot of judges who aren't exactly knowledgeable in certain areas, and may just have no experience in the kind of case you have or something. And you don't necessarily have to have any type of superior qualifications to be either appointed or be elected in Georgia to be a judge. I mean, we have a fantastic judicial system, but I was surprised as a lawyer because you study the cases and you read the cases written by these great Supreme Court justices and these very learned people, and realize that judges are human just like everybody else. And it's the same thing, I think, with ministers. I think that that's one of the things that I've come to know is that I have deference and respect for ministers. I think that their calling is, I couldn't do it. I'm amazed by it. And I'm encouraged by my time that I spend with ministers on one-on-one, but they're human beings just like the rest of us. They have, issues just like the rest of us. And I think that's, has kind of helped me as I go back and I look at David in the Bible, and I look at, here's a guy that was an adulterer and a murderer, and yet he was a man after God's own heart. And I say, if that person, can do it, then I can do it. And so I think it encourages me to kind of step alongside the ministers when I have an opportunity, and just to share with them what I'm going through, and to hear from them what they're going through, and to pray for them. And so from my standpoint, it helps me feel like I'm participating in the edification of other believers.
Well, thank you so much for your service and being willing to, come before us this morning and share a little bit about what goes on behind the scenes. And the behind the scenes is, always going to impact us in one way, shape, or form. The news of late has been pretty significant. I'm mindful of our time, and I'd asked Jeff to come and if he was available this morning. I know he's got a big day today. And before we do prayer, sort of at the prayer concerns at the end, Jeff, would you mind, helping us a little bit relate to what's been going on in the news?
Sure. Thanks, Eric. Yeah, I wonder what people's capacity is. We started this year with the whole idea around General Conference coming up and the Methodist Church, and the division that has caused within the Methodist Church. Many of y'all are in Sunday school classes and other groups where that was the topic of discussion. You had opportunity to learn what both sides, and there was a lot of anxiety over what was going to happen to the Methodist Church, and a lot of frustration, a lot of anger, a lot of churning going on. And then beginning of February, I guess, somewhere in there, we started dealing with the whole pandemic, and the General Conference issues seemed to go on the back page, and we had a whole new thing to worry about and think about, and wonder what's going to happen, and what's going to happen to us, and what's going to happen to the church. And then over the last couple of weeks, with the event down in South Georgia, with the shooting of the man there, and then now with the George Floyd thing, and some of the other events that have taken place, we find that the pandemic is a secondary story, which is incredible to think of. And so the challenge for us is what seems to be different right now. Why has this gotten so much traction? Why are there protests day and night? And where is this headed? Where is it going? What needs to be done? Why do events like this keep happening? Why can't that be fixed? I think from time to time we get lulled into the belief that everything's fine and everybody's good, and things like this help us recognize that there's a frustration level that cuts across so many different areas. So I was interested in Jimmy's description of the deacon as part of their job description being about justice, and how to take the church into the world and bring the world into the church. And so, and then with the appointive system and the connectional system that the Methodist Church has, my goodness, this is a issue uh, the racial equality and tension. You know, Jimmy was talking about the bishop, and one of the challenges is where communities are changing. Maybe there was a strong white church that now is in a predominantly black community, and how do you make that change? And or the other way around, do we do cross-racial appointments? Would that be helpful? You know, would having a minister of color at the church help us identify issues and themes and things? Would that make some of the discussions better, worse? I'm not sure. So, you know, what is in a predominantly white congregation like Roswell with a lot of privilege, what are some things that we could be doing? What's our response? What's the way that we should be addressing this? What should we be praying for? What can our church do? How can we step into this unrest? And what about the United Methodist Church? How do we work with other churches that may be more on the, you know, boots on the ground, right in the middle of some of the things that are taking place? We do a lot of mission work in various parts of the world, and even in the city of Atlanta. So, you know, is sending some food and some goodwill and some money the extent of our responsibility, or does it go deeper than that? I think that you know, there's a great discussion that's happening on all kinds of different levels, and each of us looking around this morning are in different places of influence and connection, and people we know, people we work with, and I think paying attention to that and being mindful of that, being mindful of where we are in the midst of this, and what we may need to learn, and areas that we may need to grow and address this, I think is certainly a challenge. And so I think it's we don't have any sort of formal response or activity or ask going on right now at the church, but I think that all of us are impacted by this in different ways, and it certainly needs our attention and our prayers, and our focus to recognize that some things are broken, and have been for a long time, and what do we need to do to be a part of moving things forward, and not be a part of tearing things apart?
Well, Jeff, I know in you know, times like this, when we look at our own culture, it's sometimes hard to see it. During GIC window, the Free Burma Rangers movie was premiered nationwide. I went to a showing of that, and at the end, there is a real time of focus. It is now available on Prime Video. If you have not seen that, it puts a perspective on social issues that is not in your face in a controversial, make you embarrassed kind of way. It draws you into the life, to that family's life. I'd really suggest that as something that, if you've not watched that with your family, I've been trying to watch it with my kids. My dad was a Presbyterian minister, and you know, we didn't grow up with the Methodist tradition, but I got to know a lot of missionaries. And when you see what other people's lives look like compared to ours, it gives you a great deal of patience and acceptance on, you know, what the way we perceive things. It's funny how you have to look at it from another point of view sometimes to be able to see what matters.
Yeah.
I really want to thank, Jimmy here for coming this morning and giving us a little insight on how we get people like Jeff into our life, right? Yeah, our ministers, to most of us, show up, and, most of us get to know them. And when they leave, we're like, but I just got to know that one. And so we've experienced the angst of that. But, I'm grateful for a community where, even though the ministers might move around, many of us get to stick around and get to know each other over long periods of time. We have run we're running long today, and I'm not going to break us out into breakout sessions. I promise in July we'll probably do that, because I know many of you, if you're involved in a Sunday school class or a small group, hopefully you're getting this kind of engagement on a regular basis. If you're not in a Sunday school class or a small group, please reach out to either Jeff or I. We want to make certain that we're making it convenient for guys to get together and talk, and to talk about the things that are really going on, their news, their jobs, their health. There's so much at play, and we miss each other not being on campus. And you miss bumping into somebody and having that conversation. You have to be deliberate right now. So, I want to give thanks. I was going to ask either Jeff or Jimmy to close us in prayer and, set us off on the right note for the rest of the day.
Hey, Eric?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, Rusty, I'm sorry. I know we're a little late, but I just would love to make, and I know it's a wild subject, but I want to make just a comment on what Jeff said, because he said, what can we do? Most of the guys on this, you guys know, and I have a biracial grandson. What you don't know is that I've been involved with some Black leaders in Atlanta, a couple that are authors. They mentor Black pastors. One's a ex-all-pro football player at Fellowship. And it's given a unique opportunity. And unfortunately, my number came up for teaching the Bereans this coming Sunday. So, it will be my opportunity to lose friends, I think, to talk about this. I just want to mention that there are just a couple of things we can absolutely do. The first one is admit, and here's what we need to admit, because it was a perfect day. Jimmy's done a great job leading us on the Methodist Church, but admit that the white evangelical church has largely been silent for 75 years on this subject. We have not heard sermons on it. We have global missions, and we don't address this area. So we have been quiet, and omission is a sin in this type of area. The second thing, and it's the simplest thing, it's the reason I wanted to speak, the simplest thing, you can go on Google, there are 100 documents on how to do this, is just listen. I have a lot of adult friends that are Black, and they're in our church. Many of y'all know Mitchell. I would ask you, how many of you know his story? Not his stand up in front of the group story, but his story. I do not know a Black adult that has not been an obvious victim of racism. I don't know one. So the first thing that is asked by my buddies is just listen. Just listen. Just so I would say to you right now, in the next 2 weeks, call your Black friend or find a Black friend and say, hey, I'm hurting with you. Can you tell me how you're feeling? And don't identify with their story. You can read on Google how to do this. Don't identify with their story. Don't say, well, when I was a kid, just listen. Okay? So sorry about that. I just want to share that, and I'll pop off.
Well, thank you, Rusty. I lived in South Georgia. My dad's first church was in Cairo, Georgia. And his second church was in Randolph Clay, which is so big, so small, if you will, that one high school for 2 counties. And my brother went to middle school at what used to be the Black high school. And when you live in communities that are not Atlanta, you get a very different sense of what goes on. And just listening is a beautiful way to say, how can I better understand something that I didn't live, that others have? So thanks for sharing that this morning.
I have a question for Jimmy. if it's okay.
Sure.
So, Jimmy, I know you were in Metter. I just have to ask, did Michael Guido have any influence on you while you were there? Do you know who he is?
Yeah. My boss, we represented Guido and the seed from the sower. I would say that he didn't have a lot of influence. I listened to him because when I was in college, he came on in Macon, Georgia, just before the television went off at like 1 a.m. or midnight or whatever it was. And there was Michael Guido's The Seed for the Garden of Your Heart, and then they played the national anthem, and the television went to snow, in those days. No 24-hour cable. And so I was familiar with him, and then met him a couple of times down there. Really, the thing that happened is that my boss was more of an agnostic, or maybe he was just a troublemaker. But he would come in with the Bible and would say, "This is all messed up." He'd use a word other than messed. And he would say that, this God tells these people to go kill all these other people. That can't be right. And he would just, so I would have these discussions with him. And occasionally I would tell Guido when he would have time to spend with him that he needs to talk to Ogden about such and such. But that, nothing specific other than that.
Thanks. Yep. I went to Georgia Southern when it turned into a university, and during that time in the late 80s, early 90s, and we would pop over to Metter where everything's better, and go to Guido Gardens and spend time in the chapel, and it was a great time.
Well, Jimmy, would you mind closing us in prayer?
Sure, be glad to.
Thank you, sir.
Guys, let me do this before I start, if you don't mind. So my mom recently passed away, and in her box that had all her instructions and so forth, and she had written this. I might get a little choked up about it. Happy moments, praise God. Difficult moments, seek God. Quiet moments, worship God. Painful moments, trust God. Every moment, thank God. So with that kind of mantra and those instructions, let's go to the Lord in prayer. God, we thank you for the time this morning. I lift up each of these men as they go into the marketplace, as they go about their day-to-day activities. Lord, I pray that you would be with us. Help us to be your men in the marketplace. Help us to transact on your behalf and show your love. Be your hands and your feet in this time, in this age. Lord, keep us mindful as predominantly white privileged men that there are children of yours who have different experiences. There are children of yours who are hurting. There are children of yours who need help. Lord, we ask for the opportunity to come alongside them and the wisdom, the courage to come alongside them and the wisdom to do the right thing and to help edify them for you. And it's in your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, men, for being here this morning, and Jimmy for leading us today. And go out into the world and be the children of God you were created to be. See you guys.
Thanks, Eric. Great job.
Thank you.